for. Susan Azim Boyer has worn many different hats in her career as a writer. As a screenwriter, she was accepted to the Sundance Producers Conference and went on to write and direct the independent feature All You Need, which played on the festival circuit. With time, she began writing young adult fiction featuring the Iranian American heroines she never encountered growing up, who make messy, complicated choices that rapidly snowball into avalanches. Jasmine Zumideh Needs a Win is her young adult fiction debut. Naseem Jamnia was born to Iranian immigrant parents and was raised on the north side of Chicago, which they still call home, even though they no longer live there. They have also worn more than one hat as a former neuroscientist whose writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, The Rumpus, and the Writers' Chronicle, among others. Their debut novella, The Bruising of Kilwa, was released this summer to critical acclaim. Naseem now lives in Reno with their husband, dog, and 2 cats. It is my pleasure to turn the event over to them.
Yay, thanks so much, Susan, the Susan S, not Susan AB. Thanks everyone so much for coming. We are here celebrating Jasmine Zumideh Needs a Win. So how are you feeling, Susan?
I'm feeling good. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so proud to be hosted by Politics and Prose and to be with you, Naseem.
Oh, thanks, friend. Yeah, so for those who are tuning in because you're like, what is this book? I'm curious.
This crazy name.
Yeah, so this Jasmine Zumideh Needs a Win is a YA historical set in 1979.
Let's say near contemporary.
All right, fine. It is we'll talk about like its relevance to today because there certainly is like very super relatable. But it stars a Persian American kid, an Iranian American kid named Jasmine, who is a senior. She wants to be a music journalist. She loves music, and she wants to get to NYU because that's the ticket to her music journalism career. But she wants to be able to stand out. If anyone's doing college applications or remember college applications, it's like, what is your thing that's going to make you get in to the school? And so she decides that she's going to run for senior class president, but her application is due sooner than the election results. And so as Susan has said before, this tiny white lie that she's won already has snowballs into an avalanche.
President-elect. She says president-elect. So yeah,
it's a small lie.
A little exaggeration since the election hasn't even happened.
Yeah, they haven't she does it before they even really start campaigning. So it's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the backdrop, and then the Iranian hostage crisis hits. So which we will be talking about soon. So Susan's going to go ahead and start us off with a reading. And the background kind of this reading is that this is the morning after the news has broken about the hostage crisis, students storming the embassy in Tehran. I'll give you kind of a brief history of the hostage crisis soon, but Jasmine has submitted her NYU application. And this morning she's argued with her brother Ali, who's younger, correct? He's a junior?
Younger, yeah, he's younger.
Who is like, this is totally radical. And she's like, oh my God, I'm gonna kill you. And her aunt Mina is also there, and she's very worried for their, her mother, their grandmother, who's in Tehran. So why don't you take it away for us, Susan?
Yeah, I will say, just add a couple more things that, Jasmine, the reason why I wanted her to run for senior class president during the Iran hostage crisis is she kind of has this secret shame around her Iranian American identity because she's grown up in a largely, predominantly white Southern California suburb, kind of beachy Southern California suburb with a quote unquote weird name and family that, has a weird language. And suddenly this international incident explodes across the nightly news, and her opponent, Gerald, is going to stir up some anti-Iranian hysteria. And to put it in context for those who are much younger, the Iran hostage crisis was kind of like 9/11. It was shocking, and it dominated the news media for weeks and weeks, really for a year with the Iran hostage crisis. And in the same way that suddenly there was this really ugly suspicion and mistrust about Muslims, the same thing happened with Iranians. There was suddenly this suspicion and mistrust. So this, as Naseem said, this is the day after this shocking event has happened. And Jasmine goes to school. The election is on. She's campaigning, but and Ali is her brother. Gerald is her opponent. So here we go. As I park and make my way through the lot, there's a strange buzz, snippets of animated conversation, and random words like Iranian and hostages. I pull my folder closer to my chest. Everyone is still buzzing when I get to homeroom. Gerald is holding up a newspaper with a banner headline that reads, "American hostages seized." "Did you hear what happened in Iran?" he asks. It was on all the networks. I want to tell him it's pronounced Iran, but don't. The homeroom teacher, a substitute, tries to take roll. "What are you squawking about?" "Didn't you hear?" Gerald holds up the paper. "Iranians seized the US embassy. They're holding everybody hostage." He puts the paper down and turns to his ROTC buddies. "My dad said it's an act of war, like Pearl Harbor, that we should bomb the living crap out of the entire Middle East so we don't end up with another Vietnam." This sounds like a gargantuan overstatement, but still, I say nothing. Part of me wants to defend the Iranian students like Ali. Part of me is mortified by them. "Pipe down while I call roll," says the sub, an older woman with a sky-high bouffant. Gerald quietly resumes his discussion with the junior GI Joes. The first one says, "I heard those Iranians are religious fanatics." The second one says, "Yeah, they're mausoleum or something." "Muslim," I finally say, but nobody hears me. Gerald makes a circling motion around his head. "The women, they all wear sheets on their faces." I can't help it. "It's called a chador and they wear it for modesty's sake." Of course, right then, the sub calls my name. "Jasmine, Zumideh?" She throws up her hands like she can't be expected to keep trying. "Zumideh." My stomach roils. Gerald looks at me, suspicious. "You're Iranian, aren't you?" It's suddenly 1973 again, the last time Grandma and Grandpa Zumideh visited, before Grandpa died, when Gerald said told everyone we were weird. That was only the beginning. Bridget walked by their room once while Grandma and Grandpa were chanting and praying on their prayer rugs and asked, "What are they doing?" With that look of confusion and disgust you get after a shot of Jägermeister. When I told her they were praying, she said, "They're supposed to be in church." I was too embarrassed to tell her that Muslims pray in mosques. Even Grandma Jean used to refer to Allie and me as our little brown babies, as if we were spoiled fruit, unlike our cousins who are Wonder Bread white. My cheeks would burn with embarrassment, but when people asked, "What are you?" I've always said Iranian. While Gerald stares at me, my brain performs an instant series of calculations and spits out the following. I'm Persian. Does he know Persian and Iranian are basically the same thing? He doesn't. My stomach relaxes a little.
Thank you for that. Oh man, that was so great to hear you read that scene with the inflections.
By the way, that was a thing. That was a thing that during that time when people asked, "Are you Iranian?" That was like the common response of like, "No, I'm Persian." And, most people didn't know that they were the same thing. So again, it was, yeah. And I think that would, when people are made sort of the bad guy, and there's just this negative media narrative, it's really difficult because the actions, the actions of the few get conflated with the entire culture. And that's the whole kind of crux of the book.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I want to come back to that, but that is something that certainly we see all the time, right? Whenever something happens to a person of course, like a non-white kind of group, that's surprise. This group is now target, shocker. But so I want to give a very, very brief context of the hostage crisis for people who aren't familiar with it. So
Please.
In 1979, Iran's revolution, which had started the year before, had already been co-opted by religious leaders. Which they came, in February of 1979, they ousted the pro-democracy prime minister, that the last one that the Shah had put into place. They ousted him. They were like, "No, you are a traitor," and they made him flee. By November, they voted to become an Islamic Republic, but on the ballots, they didn't actually give a space to oppose it. So it was kind of, a no contest. Around the same time, the US allowed the former Shah and his family to enter into the US because the Shah had cancer for many years at that point. So he came in to get cancer treatments, and people were outraged in Iran because they viewed him as a criminal. The Shah had used his secret police to crack down on people who were against him during the revolution, a little before the revolution. And so they wanted him to face trial for his crimes. So in November, students stormed the US embassy, demanding the Shah's release from Iran, to Iran, and they held staff hostage, basically. They let a few people go. Funny enough, they let, I think, 2 Black people and a woman go, because they're like, yes, fellow minorities in the struggle, and like women are sacred in Islam, which, let's talk about today. What are you doing?
Exactly.
And then for over a year, 444 days, these hostages were they were not trapped in the embassy. They were moved. But the result afterwards is like the theocratic power was consolidated more in Iran. There was more anti-American sentiment. But then the Iran-Iraq war happened it started in 1980. And there wasn't international support for Iran. And the US-Iran relations really soured, and you can kind of see what the result of that today is. So that was a lot. With all that in mind, let's talk about choosing that as the backdrop of this book, and kind of where you wanted to go, why that event, how that was going to lead into the themes and whatnot. Talk to us.
Well, so I'll give you a little background of where I started. So I started the book many years back. And it was just kind of a very standard, coming of age, slice of life, young adult novel, but not interestingly, but sort of interestingly, largely the same cast: Jasmine, the same friend group, Bridget, Patty, Malia, same love interest and all that, and the same world, growing up again in this predominantly white Southern California suburb. And the theme was about her kind of secret shame around her Iranian identity and sort of coming to terms with that. But there was really no urgency to it. So I kind of put it aside. And then years and years later, after the freak out over Barack Hussein Obama running for president, it kind of hit me, Jasmine needs to run for president. That's what she needs to do, is run for class president, just as the hostage crisis explodes across the nightly news, because this will just heighten, her embarrassment around her heritage. Is going to force her to make a choice. Is she going to do the right thing and embrace her heritage and stand up for Iranian people? Or is she going to run away from it while she's running for office? So that's why I chose to set it, anchor it during the time of the hostage crisis. It wasn't just a random, let's put it in 1979. So, but the thing that's interesting to me is on Goodreads, some of the reviews, many of the reviews will say this YA contemporary, and it's like, okay, technically it's not contemporary, but I think the themes, again, of kind of, a negative media narrative around an entire culture, like Muslims, like LGBTQ, trans people today, like, Latinx people, or, as the former president said, Mexicans. It's like there's a negative media narrative, and that's what I wanted her to confront. So that's why I said it in that time period and during this incident.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that comes through in the book. Like, one reason maybe why people are saying YA contemporary is because it reads like something that could be happening today, right? So granted, like the music that she's talking about is time specific, right? Or the clothes she's talking about are time specific, but the idea, like, how is the media's role in what, our daily lives, looking when the media is making kind of broad generalizations, sweeping statements about a group of people. And then there's all the like everyday sort of drama that's happening, right? Like, this is not just a book where it's like, here's the presidential election, and then she goes home and she's like, oh no, am I Iranian enough? Which I want to talk about soon. But there's kind of like the rest of her life is still happening, right?
Yeah, there are definitely multiple threads. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, it makes sense to me that people are like, well, this resonates as a contemporary, because our lives are, that's exactly what happens, right? Like your life is still happening even when there's these large events that are going on in the background.
Yeah, and I also think that there are certain, things that are universal. Like for instance, the friend group, the senior year friend group drama. I mean, that has been happening since time immemorial, and it will happen, forever after. And by the way, the funny thing about the music is I feel like Spotify basically collapsed the space-time continuum, and all music is happening everything is happening now. Nothing, it's not back in the olden days when, a CD would come out and they sold out of it. They don't have any access to it anymore, or, they're not carrying it anymore. I know that, my son was in high school not too long ago, and I would drive everybody before he got his license. What do you want to listen to on Sirius? They all wanted to listen to the classic rock station. It's like, come on, kids. I'm the one wanting to discover new artists like Jasmine. And they're like, because that's what their parents listen to. So I think like you said, there are many threads. It's not just this like political.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's funny just the like, well, we want to listen to the classic music, but your music tastes are truly like, it's like if you have older siblings, it's that, right? Or it's what your parents listen to, or once you hit high school, it's like, what are my friends? I mean, certainly like my friends define my music taste because my parents listen to nothing but Persian music. So go figure that one out. So actually I want to, in these multiple threads, you'd mentioned like the drama and the friend group. So one of the things that pops up is, like Jasmine's closest friends, Bridget and Patty, she's like, would they even be friends if it wasn't for me, right? All three of them are like super, super different from one another. Drama happens, kind of lots of drama. So can you talk a little bit more about the friends, drama, their kind of their place in the story? Because you could have told the story with just as many complicated threads, but not without this kind of like real, things that I'm like, I remember high school.
Exactly. I remember high school too. And like I said, senior year friend group drama is very common. I think a couple of things. I wanted to show like the shifting dynamics and loyalties in a friend group. And I think especially in friend groups that form when like we're all so much younger, like maybe in elementary school or middle school. And I think especially for young adults in their senior year, you're reassessing your friendship because everyone's going to scatter. Everybody's going off to college. Everybody's getting jobs. You're not in this forced proximity anymore. And so I wanted to see, number one, that pressure on the friendships, because like you said, Naseem, maybe they don't have that much in common. And maybe if they had all just met in high school, they wouldn't have been friends. But because at least Patty and Bridget and Jasmine have known each other since elementary and middle school, respectively, they're sort of still together in high school. And then Malia is sort of like Switzerland. She always tries to remain neutral. And so I will say I'm still friends with several of my high school. One of my best friends, Kitty, I've known since high school. But the other, I think, really important function they serve, and the reason why I set up kind of a years-long kind of rivalry between Bridget and Patty. Well, number one, I think anytime there are three friends, it's like, it always shifts that like two get a little closer. One is kind of left out. And then
I was always the third.
When circumstances change, right. But so they have this rivalry. And then so by Jasmine calling herself president-elect on her application, which she does because she thinks there's no way I can lose. My opponent wants to reinstate a dress code, for heaven's sake. But then the election is kind of turned upside down. And he stirs up all this anti-Iranian hysteria, but mostly because she didn't know that the early decision deadline was so soon, she told a lie and called herself president-elect. And so now she made this initial compromise. She breached her integrity, and it's almost like that infects everything. And so, it seeps into the friend group, and there is a compromise of integrity and a betrayal on Jasmine's part with Bridget, because again, she's set the dominoes in motion. The first domino fell, and now she is just in this process of, as she kind of says, now I know cover-ups are always accompanying crimes, because you kind of, tell that first lie or you make that first compromise, and then it's just compromise after compromise after compromise. I think she also says at one point, I'm caught in a web of lies, the spider and the fly. And so that was another element that I wanted to add with Bridget and Patty, is it just further supports that notion that she's going down this wrong path and just making Jasmine, somebody said in a review, I want to shake her and I want to hug her.
It's a good, I mean, it's true. I want to shake her and hug her too, because we, like when we're in high school, we make questionable. I mean,
Yes.
we don't need to be in high school to make questionable choices.
I was going to say, have you seen some of the people running for election these days? I mean,
yeah. Please register to vote if you can, if you're over 18.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I find that really interesting though, that like part of Jasmine's journey of, am I compromising my integrity and my values as a person? Which, if you're, granted, she wants to do music journalism, but if you're going to be a journalist, like ethics is such a huge part of journalism,
Her journalism teacher says that, like, you must conduct yourself with unimpeachable integrity.
Yeah. Yikes.
She's falling a little short of that ideal.
Yeah. So I love that, kind of just like the consequences. It feels like this small lie, I am president-elect, shouldn't have an effect on kind of like her social life.
It's harmless.
But it does.
She thinks it's harmless. Again, she's going to win. What is the big deal? Right. And then when she's told the lie, well, now she thinks her campaign is imperiled. Yeah. Well, what would she do? Then she would have to call NYU and say, oh, as it turns out, I wasn't president-elect. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind about the book is, it's not just an election to Jasmine. It's an existential threat, because she sees this whole through line between I get into NYU, then I get into the journalism program. By the way, she's also vying against Gerald to get into the journalism program, in highly selective universities and sort of, very selective programs like NYU Journal. They only accept like 20 students nationwide. They typically would not accept 2 students from the same school. So she's kind of been told, okay, they're not going to accept both of you. So she's vying against him for her spot at NYU. And she thinks, if I don't win, my dream is dashed. I won't be able to write about music the way I want to. And she sees her future just stuck in this airless cubicle, as a copywriter for her dad's contracting company. So it's, as I said, it's not just an election to Jasmine. If she loses, it's an existential threat, which I think explains a little bit why she goes to such lengths to win.
Yeah, I think this relates really nicely to her her crises about like herself, so part of it is the like, how am I compromising myself? Is it such a big deal? Does the end justify the means? There is that aspect. Mm-hmm. There's the friend aspect, like, am I being a good friend to Bridget, especially to Bridget, but also to Patty? Yeah. And then there's her heritage aspect, right? So like in the excerpt you read, she straight up says she's embarrassed. Like, she's totally mortified. Yeah. And I think when you're in any sort of diaspora, there's always the question of, am I X enough? Am I American enough? Am I Iranian enough? And it's a different, I think it's a related but slightly different conversation if you are like half too, right? It becomes more complicated. Like, oh, but I have a white parent, which means that my white grandmother sees me and calls me her little brown baby, which I'm screaming right now, right? So, like
an unintended microaggression, grandma.
Right. No, I mean, like, and those things add up, right? Like, there's all the ways that like Jasmine's name is constantly mispronounced, constantly called Iran or Iran, or Iranians, like, and I love that happens in the book, because that's what happens, right? That's like a very kind of daily event. So, I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit more about, your experiences in the diaspora as somebody who's Iranian American and trying to navigate that, especially when you were a teen and a kid.
Yeah. So my mother was Irish American, and that my mother's side of the family is like granddaughter of the American Revolution. My father is an Iranian immigrant. He was one of those immigrants who was all about assimilation. He was one of the first foreign-born students to get a master's degree in journalism from the University of Nebraska. So he was all about like perfecting his English. And what happened is he came to the United States to go to the University of Nebraska, where there was a cohort of Iranian students who had all been kind of recruited to go there. And then he stayed because he met my mother, whereas the rest of the cohort returned to Iran. And they came back after the revolution, which was, decades later, but they had already married Iranian women. And so, and, you know, they kind of cloistered themselves inside like Iranian expat communities. Whereas my dad married my mom, who's, you know, white and Irish American. And Farsi was not spoken in our home. There was nobody to speak it with my dad, and he didn't teach it to us. It's not that common. Even some of my cousins today who are fluent, by the way, just like Jasmine, I don't speak Farsi. You know, it's hard to teach a child a second language. Some of my cousins, I keep saying, teach the kids Farsi, teach them Farsi. And they're like, it's hard. I go, I know. So I grew up with very little exposure to kind of the Iranian community or culture. My main doses of it was when our grandparents would visit. And after the revolution, they never came anymore. We never saw them again, just talked to them on the phone. Apparently when they came, when my sister and I were really little, you know, like 4 and 5 and 6, we would speak Farsi fluently because they would stay with us.
Buy that.
Yeah, stay with us for several months at a time. But then as soon as they left, it just kind of all dissipated. So, and I think the other thing about the shame around her identity, I feel like it's not necessarily like an internal innate thing. I think it's more that people outside of you, you know, are always mispronouncing her name and saying it's weird and kind of dismissing or denigrating her culture. And that becomes internalized. And so that was kind of my experience, very mild, not, you know, dramatic, but kind of a mild embarrassment around being Iranian, until my dad got remarried when I was in like my early 20s to my wonderful stepmother, Mitra. She's also an Iranian immigrant. She comes, you know, from a family of 5 kids, has lots of nieces and nephews, and my stepbrother, Mo. And then I got like immersion in an exposure to the Persian culture, and which, like, when we went to their wedding, my sister, my husband, and I sat, we were at our tiny little, we were literally the 3 people at the English only table. Like everyone else was Iranian and speaking Farsi.
Oh, man.
But when they got married, I got much more immersed in the culture, and I loved it. I loved it. I was like, I love this food. I'm celebrating Persian New Year. I'm going to make a half scene. I wanted to know so much more about the history. So I've really embraced it since then. I'm very proud of my Persian culture. I'm very proud of my ancestry. My dad's mother, my grandmother, was a princess in the Qajar dynasty, which preceded the Pahlavi dynasty, which was the one that was overthrown by the Ayatollah. Iran has a very tumultuous history. So yeah, and I will also say that I do think to some degree shame around some dimension of our identity is a bit of a hallmark of high school, right? I think everybody, there's something, even like I said, my son was in high school not long ago, and I kind of thought, oh, Gen Z, they're so evolved, you know, they are probably just proud about everything. And they're not. They have the same embarrassments. That's part of the maturing into adulthood. And I think, again, it's more finding that internal sense of self-respect that is not contingent upon anybody else validating you. So that's been my experience, and it's been a real joy. Like I said, I've evolved to the point where I'm very, very proud of my Persian heritage now.
Yeah, I love
I want
that.
to speak Farsi. Naseem, teach me Farsi.
Oh my God. You know, it's so true. Like if my parents like didn't, I mean, Farsi was my first language, and if that wasn't the case, I'm so bad at languages. Like, I don't think I would have learned it. And every day I lose it, right? Yeah. Every day I'm losing more and more because I'm not talking it. Although my husband's so cute because he like took the Pimsleur courses so he can, so we talk in like simple sentences.
That is so sweet. I know I tell myself from time to time that I'm going to get on Babbel or whatever, but like you said, it's hard when you're older. It's hard. It's very confusing to me. I'm like, what? So yeah, it'll be on my bucket list. I don't know if I'll ever get it checked off my bucket list, but it's on there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like it's funny because language is one way to tie to heritage, right? True. It's not the only way.
That's true.
And it's in the, you know, in the context of an immigrant coming to this country and wanting to Americanize because they are trying to assimilate, which I'd say, you know, my dad would have immigrated right around that. And he was in America for the hostage crisis. He was in college at the time. My mom came after the revolution. And, they had like just that 10-year gap or whatever was enough for them to be like, when we have, family. And also it helped that they're both Iranian, right? Like that makes it a lot easier, right? When you can kind of have a talk in the house. And, I grew up in a Sufi center, it's a whole thing. So
yeah, exactly. You were immersed in a community.
But, interestingly enough, the part of Persian culture I got, like, it wasn't the party part. It wasn't the let's go get our Mercedes Benz, like the kind of the Tarantulas,
like the Shahs of
stereotypes.
Sunset.
Yeah, exactly. Like those kind of stereotypes. Like I was basically the culture I got was our literature, our music, our arts culture.
That's
because
amazing.
I'm Sufi, and a lot of
a lot
of Sufi poets were Persian and wrote in Persian. So.
Yes.
So it's really interesting just thinking now, a few years ago, my mom was like, what do you think Persian culture is? And I was like, Mom, please tell me I know something about the culture I was raised in, So there's such an interesting, there's all these gray areas in the way that you relate to culture and the way that you celebrate it, which really comes through with Jasmine's brother. Ali is he's such a, we've talked about him before. I think everyone loves Ali because he's the epitome of doing the right thing. He's a year younger than her, but he's very politically active. He immediately stands up when the hostage crisis happens. He's like, this is, due to the Shah's crimes. This is because the US was meddling in the 50s, and which is all true, right? And he, and time again, is like, I'm not ashamed of my background.
Yes.
But, he's still a 16-year-old or 17-year-old kid. Like, he's going to have shame about something, right? He's just not the point of view character for us to get that kind of.
Right. True.
And it seems like part of the shame is around romantic availability.
Right.
That seems like that's part of his
that's
stuff.
True. But that's true.
Can we talk a little bit about him as a character, his relationship with Jasmine, why you wanted to have this, this other character to show the right thing?
Yeah, it kind of tickles me that he's definitely emerged. He's kind of a fan favorite. People are like, Ali's my favorite character. And I think, like you say, because he's there to contrast with Jasmine. He is there to kind of stand up and do the right thing and speak out. I will say it's better able to stand on principle because he has nothing personally at stake. He, has nothing to lose. Whereas, again, in Jasmine's mind, she has everything to lose. Again, to her, losing the election is an existential threat. But he partly serves the purpose. He does convey a lot of, exposition about kind of the history. I think what he wants everyone around him to be aware of more than anything is the context for the crisis. He's not defending the students at all. He's trying to say, understand, number one, don't conflate the actions of this government with Iranian people. And secondly, there's a context to this crisis that involves the United States. Because as you just mentioned, there was an election in 1953. The prime minister who the people supported would have sort of cut off US involvement in development of the oil industry. And so the CIA fomented a coup against him, brought back the monarch, who kind of ruled with an iron fist because he was unpopular. And then that's, laid the groundwork for the 78, 79 revolution. And then that in turn laid the groundwork for what we're seeing today. When the will of the people is thwarted, as Malia says, when people are fed up, they rise up. So like I said, I think he's able to stand on principle because he has nothing to lose. But he does convey a lot of backstory, but I also wanted to put him in because, my parents got divorced and they had kind of, a stormy relationship, and it did take a toll on the relationship with me and my sister. We're very close now. It's just the two of us, but I just thought that was, I wanted to see that sibling, relationship and see how when the parents fracture, how it kind of trickles down to the kids. And she says, when mom and dad started arguing, we did too, just over silly things. And there's nobody really there to kind of, adjudicate them. And so, yeah, I love him as a character, but I like to stand up for Jasmine a little bit and say, actually, now that I think of it, probably even if she weren't running for president, she would probably still, at least initially, deny her heritage, because as I said, she has this secret shame. But, ultimately, we're going to root for her that she can accept this part of herself that others have deemed unacceptable.
Yeah. And I mean, she is like peak disaster main character, like it's not just, I mean, for her, it's like, I get to NYU. That means I get to leave my context with kind of the
Yes.
fracturedness
Yes.
of my home. It's, it's not just about like, what I have shame about my identity. It's also like, I want to escape my context so I can reinvent myself, which I think
it's
a lot
common.
of people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really common. Yeah. You get defined by a certain persona in high school, and maybe to some degree stigmatized around something. And I think a lot of people just cannot wait to shed that and reinvent themselves, in the university. Yeah, she's been called a disaster MC. I actually had not really known that term before I wrote this book, and people started saying she's a disaster MC, which, if I understand correctly, means that, she makes a series of questionable decisions. I think what mitigates it a little bit, she knows she's making questionable decisions. She isn't just like a bull in a china shop. She knows she's making the wrong choice at the wrong time, but she rationalizes it. She minimizes, the breaches of her integrity and rationalizes it because she needs so desperately to win. So, and I wanted her to be like that because I wanted readers to consider issues of ethics and integrity. And to kind of, put yourself in her place. What would you do if you, first of all, she thinks the whole notion of all of these extracurriculars on her application, why does she have to be, she says, I have good writing samples. My GPA is really solid. I did well on the SAT. Okay, not the math section, but she did well on the English section. Why do I have to be like a youth pastor or have my pilot's license or have been to the Junior Olympics, So right off the bat, she kind of thinks it's silly to begin with, that they want to see all these extracurriculars. And she also just thinks Gerald is so ridiculous that what is the big deal if I say I'm president-elect, and of course I'll win. So yeah, but I'm hoping, maybe some readers, especially younger readers, will see the kind of error of her ways. And when you're faced with that little moment of, you have the choice to like tell the truth, do the right thing, act with integrity, or fib or fudge something, or act out of integrity or compromise yourself, maybe they'll do the right thing.
Yeah, because I think a lot of us would like to believe that we'll do the right thing in the situation. And then when the situation happens, you're like, this is so much like the right thing is very rarely the easy thing to do.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And for Jasmine, doing the right thing could mean losing the election, which means not having a chance to reinvent herself out, somewhere else, away from her family, away from her parents.
Once she sets, again, the dominoes in motion, she will always have something at stake and something significant in her mind to lose if she does the right thing. It's one of the questions we have in our question set, our discussion question set is, at what point would you have come clean if you were her? At what point would you have said, okay, I got to call NYU and tell them I lied. I guess I'm not going to your school.
Which, like, can you imagine picking up the phone and being like,
No.
hey, like, I want you to know I lied on this app. Like that is, even if you don't have severe anxiety, like that is mortifying.
And especially after her journalism teacher, who's great. He's like, the ideal teacher, tells her, you're so talented. I've never had a student get into NYU before. You're my first shot at acceptance. Make me proud. There's just all this additional pressure on her to get in. And in order to get in, she has to win the election.
Yeah. So we are at 4:40. Amazingly, I know. All the time flows. So we're going to open up to audience Q&A questions. So we've got a few already. And I'll start off with Charlene, who said that they love the book. And that it's intensely, they're like, it's intensely relevant for today. It's clear this is a story close to your heart. I think anyone who picks up this book will immediately realize that it's deeply personal on many levels. So they were wondering, what was the hardest scene for you to write and why?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
A really good question.
I saw that question and I was like,
yeah,
there's probably a lot of hard things.
I'm going to admit something that's very embarrassing to me. I loosely based the friendship between Jasmine and Bridget on one of my closest friends. I didn't go to school with her. She went to different schools. And I'm like feeling sick as I'm acknowledging this, you guys.
You don't have to tell us.
I know, but I have to say, because this is why it was so uncomfortable. She sort of abandoned me for her first serious boyfriend. which was really hurtful. Like Jasmine says in the book, you know, everyone tells you how hard it's going to be when a boyfriend breaks up with you, but no one tells you how hard it'll be like if your, you know, best friend just abandons you for her first boyfriend. And I didn't think he was worthy of her. And I caught him cheating on her. And it was like the same awkward thing where it's like, she senses that I don't like them being together. If I tell her, will she believe me? Will she shoot the messenger? He should be the one to tell her. So there was all this turmoil. And just like in the book, she found out and was furious with me, and I had to go apologize. So that, you know, there's a scene, and I think I just spoiled a couple of things, but there's a scene where she has to like make amends to Bridget, and it's painful and reminded me of some lapses in integrity that I had as I was growing up.
That's so hard. The
Yeah.
trying to balance the friend breakups are always really hard, right?
Yes,
Like I think they're some of the most painful things that you can go to. So when you're in high school and your friend that so is dated, I remember that exact feeling. And so you know, what do you do if you catch something bad happening, but you're like, oh, but they know I don't like the boyfriend because they've basically abandoned me. That's right. Like, thank you for sharing. Like, I definitely think a lot of people can, I certainly am like, I can totally think of it. And it's so, yeah, I think that's really
good question, Charlene.
So, so Sam O asks about your thoughts on balancing humor with hard politics. And you know, I wanted to talk about the humor at some point. So
yeah, it had to be. I mean, I would say that my tone is kind of like Jasmine. I can be kind of sardonic. And so that first person voice came kind of naturally. But yeah, I just knew we had a lot of heavy things happening in this, a lot of, you know, politics. I did not want it to be a book full of broccoli. So I tried to make everything as funny as possible.
What is a book full of
just like just kind of boring exposition of like this happened and that happened and then happened. I will say there's a term in screenwriting called a punch up, where you go through and there's like a script is written and the whole story is there and the characters and everything, but somebody will go in and punch it up. And especially with comedies, you have to punch up. I did so many punch up drafts on this book. Just any line that was just kind of flat, I thought, how can I put a comic turn on that? So it was time consuming. It didn't just all, you know, flow naturally. It was a real concerted effort to make the book as funny as possible. I think that's also life. Life is a paradox. It's not this or that, it's this and that. And terrible things happen. And then there's humor within it. And yeah, so I just worked hard to put those comic turns everywhere I could.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it helps because Jasmine is doing so many things that you're like, what are you doing? You're doing the wrong thing. And then there's this really, you know, tense backdrop of the hostage crisis and her aunt being really afraid of like, what does this mean for my green? What does this mean for immigration? Which was my favorite scene in the book, going to the embassy. But we have more questions, so I will not derail that. And so Lynn says congrats and said that at one point the book was conceived as a feature film. So what were the biggest changes when you decided to novelize this? And then I want to combine that with Sam's other question, which was the writing and editorial process for the book.
So this did start life as a script. I studied screenwriting at UCLA, and this began life as a script. And so one of the major differences, I would say that as a script, the major plot and characters and world didn't change, but you know, everything needed to be fleshed out. And more than anything, we needed to give the reader emotional access to Jasmine and to her thought processes, which are not in scripts. In scripts, you know, we got dialogue, and like a sentence of action. And so that just opened everything up. And it was really fun. It was fun because, again, this is probably in some respects the most me thing I'll ever write. It was first person. It's, you know, present tense. And so that was, you know, like, as I said, there weren't any huge structural changes. I did make Jasmine more active. In the earlier drafts of the script, she was sort of kind of being controlled by these Machiavellian campaign managers. And, you know, it would have been an issue with the script too. She needed to really be active and take, they are still a very Machiavellian influence on her, but she makes the choice, yes, we will get into a dirty tricks campaign. We won't run a clean campaign. She's, starts a whisper campaign. Read the book and you'll see what I'm talking about.
She fights it for a long time.
Yeah,
though.
she does. That's the other thing, is there was a lot more internal struggle, because again, now we have access to her internal thoughts. So anytime she made a wrong decision, I just wanted her to really vacillate between doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing, weighing the consequences, and then minimizing them, and then oftentimes doing the wrong thing. And the editorial process, it was long. Once I got this into manuscript form to be published, I had 3 professional edits. I'm very lucky and very privileged that I was in a position to do that and pay for them. And that just helped tremendously. But then by the time I started querying it, it went fast. I got several offers of representation within 2 months, and we had several offers of publication within 2 months after that. And my agent didn't have any changes. And then my wonderful editor, Alex Holster, one of the main things she does for me at Wednesday Books, she always makes me dig deeper, get more emotional. What was she thinking in this moment? What was the look on her face? That's another thing, is you don't really describe things in a script. It's like, well, what did that room look like? I don't know. The production designer will figure it out. What does that person look like? It's up to the casting director. And suddenly it was on me. It was funny because my beta readers were always like, what does that person look like? What's the expression on their face? And so I had to like flesh all that out. But hey, kitty.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's cameo. Making the cameo. I love it. So yeah, it was an arduous process, but it was really enjoyable because, and I ultimately now I prefer writing novels to writing scripts.
Welcome. You are now one of us. That actually answered. Sarah had a kind of questions about your publication process. So Sarah, if you had more questions regarding that, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We can follow up. Our friend Adib, hello friend, who also has wonderful YA books about Iranian American teens, that with the latest being Kiss and Tell. Hello, wants to know about the biggest surprise through the process of bringing Jasmine's story to life. What did Jasmine teach you, if anything, as you wrote?
Well, let me first say that part of the reason I wrote Jasmine Zumideh Needs a Win is because I never encountered Iranian American heroines growing up. And the first Iranian American main character that I ever encountered was in Dariush the Great. It's Not Okay. And that's Adib. And it was life-changing because I was like, I'll say that in the world of screenwriting, Jasmine was Jasmine Zumideh in the script. And all I heard when it was like pitched to people was, well, there's no bankable Iranian actor to play this. Like it was just sort of like, no one wants to see Iranian American characters on screen. You make the character white. I still hear this present day with screenwriting friends who are writing characters of color and being told, can you make this character white? Because it'll be more bankable or whatever, broadly appealing. So I think I wasn't aware of my own deep-seated kind of secret shame around being Iranian. I just never thought about it when I was younger. And I think writing the book made me realize, oh gosh. And it also, I think, made me realize again, that it was not an innate thing, that there were so many external cues that conveyed to me, you should feel ashamed of this. It is shameful, it's weird, it's different. And I think especially in high school, everybody wants to be, homogeneous. Everybody wants to be the same. You don't really want to stand out. Again, I don't really even think that's changed that much to present day. We'd like to think it has, but then you spread your wings and fly, when you graduate. But yeah, I think I just really learned how ingrained and internalized my own shame was around my identity. And I felt very proud of my evolution and again, just forged an even deeper connection, as I wrote characters like Ame Mina and Ali, and it was amazing.
I love that. I mean, it's funny because it's like something I don't know how, like if non-authors would, understand or appreciate this, of like so much of us are in the characters, that the characters also can really help us understand something about ourselves, right? True. Like just like any reader who picks up a book and is like, oh, I really resonated with X, Y, or Z thing. It's like, yeah, I did too while I was writing this.
I will say that I think so I said this is the most me book. My next book coming out is about a brother and sister who've never met, joining together to find
Sibling stories.
never
Sibling
knew. It's another
stories.
sibling story, but it's loosely based on my husband's experience, but I had to ground it in my emotional truth.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like I had to tap into my feelings of yearning for an absent parent, and my feelings. One of the characters is coping with a relative of substance abuse. I coped with that. So I think you're right. In some ways, you are all of your characters. You know, you can identify, like I can even identify, like Kyle is,
Kyle.
you know, yeah, but
Goddamn Kyle.
she says he's fiendishly clever. And he is, and there's a side of me that can be fiendishly clever. Like I could certainly be like a you know, not a criminal mastermind, but I have had my Machiavellian moments. And so, yeah, I think in some respects, all characters are us, but then we need to, you know, cut the umbilical cord and make them living, breathing people aside from that little slice of our personality.
Yeah, absolutely. We are running close to time, so Ryan has given us a bunch of really great questions. So I'm going to take two of them, especially I have the one that we're going to end on because I think you'll like this one. So Ryan wants to kind of know, you know, are there other genres you want to write in the future, and combine with that, like what makes you keep writing, which I can also answer for me.
Okay, Ryan, good question. I can't not write. My dad said this very simple thing: writers write, right? Writers don't talk about writing, you know, complain about writing, they write. And so it has taken me a long time. I have not been shy about the fact that I am making my 2022 debut with 50 in the rear view. It's taken me a long time. A lot of people that have been like writing partners and beta readers and critique partners, they've kind of fallen by the wayside. They've just given up. And there was a moment when I was tempted to give up. I pivoted to publishing from screenwriting, kind of beating my head against the wall. I just have to say this really quickly. I was signed a long time ago by a fancy pants agent at a big 3-letter agency. And what she told me is, you're going to have to wait at least a year to be put on a writing staff because we already placed a female, A as in singular. And I was like, okay. That got kind of frustrating, and we wound up moving out of the Los Angeles area. So that wasn't an option anymore anyway. And then when we moved back, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll give this another go. Cause I had kept writing. And again, I got accepted to the producers conference. There were different signals of optimism that maybe I could succeed at this. Fancy pants manager at a fancy pants agency is like, oh, like you're so talented. This is a great pilot, but you're not 22. Like, oh. So I pivot to publishing saying, okay, I'm tired of this sexism and ageism in screenwriting. Publishing is a much more welcoming environment. I know it feels like it's not, but
yeah, shocker.
compared to screenwriting, where look, trust me, no screenwriting agents are on Twitter saying, here's my manuscript wish list. So yeah, I pivoted to publishing, and I wrote another historical novel. It was a mystery set in 1895 Manhattan. Took first place, at least the first several chapters in this contest, got several requests for the full manuscript. I'm like, I'm in, woo! Not one of those people offered representation, and it was crushing. And that's when I just said, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't have my heart broken. I can't make myself vulnerable to this anymore. Then I picked myself up and dusted myself off. This is the revelation that I had. I'm going to write. Whether I get published or produced, I'm a writer. I'm going to express myself creatively. I'm going to be part of a community, a vibrant community of readers and writers. And I'm going to find joy in that and fulfillment in that. And anything else will be a natural outgrowth of the joy and fulfillment that I get from being part of this community. Just that shift in my mindset made me feel like, okay, by that definition, I'm a success. I'm already a success. So I will never not write. I love young adult. I have an adult novel brewing. I will probably always stay in realistic. I am in awe of people like Naseem that can just manufacture entire fantasy worlds out of, you know, nothing. And I may go back to this mystery like one day, but this is YA, again, near contemporary. My next 2 books are YA contemporary. My next book already has a release date of fall 2023. And then next books after that are are in the works. But yeah, YA for a little bit, yeah, adult novel brewing.
I love that. That's a pretty good place to end. Although I love this Ryan's final question, which is, if Firuz and Kofi gave one piece of advice to Jasmine, what would they say to her?
Oh my gosh, I love it. Tell me, what would they say?
So these are for people who don't know. These are the two of the main characters of my novella.
Yeah.
Which is a secondary world fantasy. And I think Kofi would definitely be on the, like, you have to be true to yourself.
Yes.
Like you ultimately need to do the right thing. I think Firuz would actually really understand Jasmine's position.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they'd be like, things are hard. And I think they would just be like, things are hard, let's have some tea. I don't think they know how to give advice.
Yeah, they are very compassionate. They are compassionate. So thank you, Firuz.
Yeah, that's they're
thank you, Ryan. Those are really fun questions.
Yeah, Ryan always asks great questions. So. Okay, yeah. I mean, we were almost at an hour, so I guess we should.
I can't believe it's gone this fast. Wow.
Wrap it up. So.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for an amazing conversation. And thank you all for joining us and for your wonderful questions. We want to thank Susan Azim Boyer and Naseem Jamnia for today's interesting presentation. We all learned so much. Don't forget, you can still click the link in the chat box to get your copy of Jasmine Zumideh Needs a Win with complimentary bookmark and signed bookplate. We have many copies waiting for you. As an independent bookstore, we appreciate your support. Also, be sure to check out our website for updating events listings, and you can follow our Children and Teens department on social media under @Kids and Prose.